What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Today, I am here to examine another issue of the X-Men. Today, I will be talking about X-Men issue 5, written by Stan Lee, with art by Jack Kirby, inks by Paul Reinman, and lettering by Sam Rosen. This issue picks up where issue 4 left off, where Professor Xavier is powerless. The X-Men all feel pretty depressed about it. Magneto and the Brotherhood got away from their skirmish with the X-Men in the previous issue, and in this issue, they come back to the mansion, and just as they're getting settled in from their debacle with the Brotherhood in issue 4, Jean Grey's parents come to visit. And we find out that Jean Grey's parents do not know that she is a mutant. And this is very interesting to me. It kind of feeds into this whole the X-Men as a metaphor for the abused and minorities struggling to fit in with the rest of the world. A lot of times Stan Lee would say it was a metaphor for racism. Later, authors in the 80s on up until the present day have used it as a metaphor for homophobia and stuff like that, just any kind of persecution in general. And this really does feel a lot like parents who aren't aware that their child is gay or their child is struggling with anything, really, where the parents, they are talking about how this is a really good school. I wonder what they're studying here. They have no idea that Jean Grey is a mutant. And incidentally, I'm pretty sure that that is retconned later on. I remember around 2006, 2007, they were doing a whole bunch of X-Men origin issues, and the one they did for Jean Grey, it was very clear that the parents and her older sister knew that she was a mutant before she ever started studying with Professor X. But as of now, it's clear that at least Jean Grey's parents do not know that she's a mutant. We're not sure about all the other parents who are still alive. We don't know about any of them. But anyway, while they're visiting the school, the X-Men are basically trying to hide the fact that this is a training ground for Professor Xavier's mutant army, and they're trying to hide the fact that Professor Xavier is unconscious from what happened in the previous issue, and Cyclops accidentally gets trapped in the danger room. This is a weird sequence. It's basically just there to fill space because everyone just forgets that Cyclops is in the danger room. They lock the door behind them, and Cyclops has to use his powers on Beast's training exercise regimen, and then he gets out, and then they don't mention it again. It's a really weird segment that, like I said, I feel like it's just there to kill some time. And also, while the X-Men are getting ready for Jean's parents to come in, we get to see them all kind of transforming back into their Homo sapien identities, and mostly it's just there to remind us that Iceman is Bobby Drake, Angel is Warren Worthington III, and he has a harness that hides his wings, stuff like that. With Beast, we get a very interesting moment where he says he would rather be Hank McCoy, and he would rather study and become a student than fight crime as the Beast and be the mutant superhero, and that's very interesting. This is, again, kind of feeding into that reluctant superhero slash supervillain thing. I talked about how Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, they are reluctant supervillains. They don't want to work with Magneto, but they feel like they have no choice. They feel like they owe him for saving Scarlet Witch's life. Now we're getting a hint that Beast doesn't really want to do this, and that's an element of his character that will stay for a very long time. If you remember in the early issues of Joss Whedon and John Cassaday's Astonishing X-Men, Beast was very much in favor of taking the cure. He did not want to be a furry Catman, and even going back to the 60s, Beast does not want to do this. Now, I don't think that we're going to get a whole lot more development on that. I have a feeling that was just something they threw in there just because they already had Iceman say something like, "I'll just defrost," and Angel says, "I'll just wear a harness," and Beast doesn't really have anything to say, so they just threw that in there, but it's still interesting, I think. But anyway, we see that Mastermind of the Brotherhood of Mutants is scouring the neighborhood looking for the X-Men. I don't know how or why he thinks that the X-Men are in this neighborhood, but we know he's like 20 feet from the Xavier Institute because Jean Grey's parents, as they're leaving, they drive right by Mastermind, and he's looking all over the place, can't find them, so then he goes back to headquarters, which is Asteroid M. This is the first time that we've seen Asteroid M, and I want to keep a mental count of how many times we will get an Asteroid M, because this is the first time, and spoilers, Asteroid M gets destroyed in this issue, and at least in 2 other appearances of Asteroid M, it also gets destroyed. So I want to kind of keep count of that as we get Magneto's various headquarters that he has throughout the world and even in orbit around the world. But anyway, we get more hijinks with the Brotherhood where Toad is hopping around basically trying to tattle on everybody else when they do something wrong, and Magneto is just in a rage against everybody, and he really needs to take some medication because I legitimately think that he has some kind of hormonal imbalance where he's just like almost a psychopath. And understandably, he is a villain, but then later on in the series, we will see that he kind of mellows out a little bit. So even when he's trying to flip the world on its axis, he's still a lot more calm than he is here. But anyway, the X-Men all decide that they are going to relax and watch a track meet on TV, except for Cyclops, who almost kills Bobby. Whenever Bobby suggests that they watch this track meet, Cyclops is like, "Get out of here!" and he blasts the door, almost hitting Iceman. But then they see that there's this guy who hops in the track meet, and we later find out this is the Toad in disguise. And when he wins the track meet by hopping, the people who are watching the game, they start to riot. And this is the first time that we get to see humans reacting negatively toward a mutant. Going back to issue 1, Professor X said that humans are going to distrust the X-Men. They're not going to like mutants, but we haven't really seen that up until now. Even in issue 2, people like the X-Men. People were shaking Cyclops' hand. People were trying to get a kiss from the Angel. So this is the first time that we've really seen this whole metaphor for racism or homophobia or what have you. This is really the first time that we're getting to see that. So the X-Men, they go and they rescue this guy who they don't know is the Toad. They later find out it is the Toad. And then another battle between the X-Men and the Brotherhood happens at this train station. Most of the Brotherhood gets away. They kidnap Angel, but Toad gets left behind. And then somehow he goes into a trance, and then he goes in this pod that takes him up to Asteroid M. The X-Men get in the pod with him. They go up there. There's another big fight. And this time, in the previous issue, Quicksilver, he was the one who sabotaged Magneto's nuclear bomb that was going to blow up the country that they had taken over. This time, it's Scarlet Witch who sabotages Magneto's efforts. And we never did get to see Magneto chastise Quicksilver in any way for not letting that country blow up. And we know that Magneto has to know that something went wrong because that country is still there. And now, he threatens Quicksilver, or he threatens Scarlet Witch, and Quicksilver gets in the way and says, "You're not going to do anything." And then the X-Men get there, and that kind of puts a halt on that. But I know that these guys, they feel like they owe an allegiance to Magneto, but at this point, both of them have openly defied Magneto. I'm very surprised that he still allows them to be in the Brotherhood, and since they are both openly sabotaging his plans for world domination, I'm kind of surprised that they are still sticking around. At this point, I would think they would both say, it doesn't matter if he saved Scarlet Witch's life, we have to get out of here because we clearly do not agree with anything that he's doing, and we've already repaid his debt by being in the Brotherhood for a certain amount of time, so let's just leave. I'm kind of surprised that Magneto is letting them stay after they both sabotaged his plans, but that's neither here nor there because the Brotherhood, they all escape Asteroid M. They leave the X-Men to die as the asteroid starts to fall apart, but the X-Men, they are able to get into one of the escape pods, and they all go back to Earth, and then Professor X surprises them and says that he never did lose his powers, that he was just testing them, and this was their final test. And Professor X is a jerk. This is the first time that we are going to get to see that. We will see many examples of Professor X doing very repugnant things throughout this series, especially in the first 66 or so issues, but it will come back into play more as the series goes on a couple decades down the line. But this is the first big moment of Professor X. Other than him mentally wiping the minds of the Blob and the Vanisher, this is the first example of him screwing with the X-Men, saying like, "Oh, I lost my powers, you guys are going to have to do this on your own." And then I'm assuming that he is the one who mentally messed with Toad, forcing him to get in the pod so that the X-Men could go to Asteroid M. So if he was going to interfere with his powers anyway, then what was the point of him even pretending like he lost his powers? I don't know. So this is a really weird final test. It kind of makes sense that he would want them to go out there on their own without his help because he is training them for this very thing. But we will see throughout the next 61 issues or so that they're not going anywhere. Even though he says that they have passed the final test and that they are ready to graduate, they're still going to be staying here at the Institute. They're still going to be training with Professor X, and they're not going out there and living new lives after they've graduated from the X-Men. So that's going to be a little weird as we see that this seems like a big transition issue and then it ends up being nothing. But anyway, this is a big issue for several reasons. Like I said, we get the first big moment of humans reacting negatively towards mutants. We get the first big example of Professor X kind of messing with the X-Men, seemingly just a big goofy prank. We get the first appearance of Asteroid M. We now get to see that Scarlet Witch has a little bit of a backbone. We saw that a little bit with Quicksilver in the previous issue, and so these are some pretty big moments. We got to see that Beast is not really wanting to be a superhero. He kind of wants to get out of that life, and then we get to see Jean's parents have no idea what's going on here. So this is a lot of big stuff, a lot of big moments for this series, and I'm very interested in seeing where a lot of this goes. I have read all of these Silver Age issues before, but it's been several several years since I read some, so it's kind of a lot of this is brand new for me, or it's interesting seeing how some of the things that we take for granted with the X-Men are showing up at different points. Like, we still have not seen Cerebro yet, so the X-Men were not able to use Cerebro to track this mutant who is part of the track meet, so we still aren't getting everything that we know to be part of the X-Men, but it's interesting seeing some of this stuff show up and how it's introduced. So anyway, that is all that I have today. Consider this issue examined.